Hey, so I know I'm extra late with this one, but nevertheless, I still wanted to express my ideas and thoughts on the subject. So, the officer Jason Van Dyke, who was involved in the slaying of Laquan McDonald in Chicago, has been convicted of second-degree murder. So, I'll read a little bit from this article from AP here, AP News. A white Chicago officer was convicted of second-degree murder in the 2014 shooting of a black teenager that was captured on a shocking dashcam video that showed him crumpling to the ground in a hail of 16 bullets as he walked away from police. The video, some of the most graphic police footage to emerge in years, stoked outrage nationwide and put the nation's third largest city at the center of the debate about police misconduct and the use of force. The shooting also led to a federal inquiry and calls to reform the Chicago Police Department. Jason Van Dyke, 40 years old, was the first Chicago officer to be charged with a murder for an on-duty shooting in about 50 years. He was taken into custody moments after the verdict was read. The second-degree verdict reflected the jury's finding that Van Dyke believed his life was in danger, but that the belief was unreasonable. The jury also had the option of first-degree murder, which required finding that the shooting was unnecessary and unreasonable. A first-degree conviction, with enhancements for the use of a gun, would have carried a mandatory minimum of 45 years. Second-degree murder usually carries a sentence of less than 20 years, especially for someone with no criminal history. Probation is also an option. Van Dyke was also convicted of 16 counts of aggravated battery, one for each bullet. One legal expert predicted that Van Dyke will be sentenced to no more than 6 years total, but because he's an officer, it will be hard time, possibly spent in isolation, said Steve Greenberg, who has defended clients at more than 100 murder trials. Laquan McDonald, 17 years old, was carrying a knife when Van Dyke fired at him on a dimly lit street where he was surrounded by other officers. One of Chicago's leading civil rights attorneys said that the conviction sends a message to minority communities that the police reforms that began after the video became public were not just for show. Andrew Stroth said an acquittal would have sent the opposite message, dashing hopes for change. I think Chicago would have erupted, he said. Defense attorney Dan Herbert called Van Dyke a sacrificial lamb offered by political and community leaders to save themselves. He said it was a sad day for law enforcement because the verdict tells officers they cannot do their jobs. Police officers are going to become security guards, he said. A McDonald family spokesperson thanked prosecutors for pursuing a case that he said many black attorneys did not believe could be won. Yeah, I can believe that. I can't rejoice because this man's going to jail, said McDonald's uncle, the Reverend Martin Hunter. I saw his wife and father. His wife and daughter didn't pull the trigger. I could see the pain in these people. It bothered me that they couldn't see the pain in us. The verdict was the latest chapter in a story that accelerated soon after a judge ordered the release of the video in November 2015. The 12-person jury included just one African-American member, although blacks make up 1/3 of Chicago's population. The jury also had 7 whites, 3 Hispanics, and 1 Asian American. Jurors said they spent much of their deliberations discussing whether to convict on first-degree or second-degree murder, not an acquittal. They said Van Dyke's testimony did not help him. One woman said he messed up and should not have testified. The jurors' names were not made public during the trial, but were not disclosed Friday. Again, this was October 5th, during the interviews with reporters at the courthouse. One said Van Dyke needed to contain the situation, not escalate it. He said the jury settled on second-degree murder because Van Dyke believed he was experiencing a real threat. Let's see. On the night of the shooting, officers were waiting for someone with a stun gun to use on the teenager when Van Dyke arrived, according to testimony and video. The video played repeatedly at the trial showed him firing even after the teen laid motionless on the pavement. Prosecutors and defense attorneys clashed over what the footage actually proved. During closing arguments, prosecutor Jody Gleason noted that Van Dyke told detectives that McDonald raised the knife and that McDonald tried to get up off the ground after being shot. None of that happened, she said. You've seen it on video. He made it up. But Van Dyke and his attorneys maintained that the video did not tell the whole story. His attorneys portrayed the officer as being scared by the young man, who he knew had already punctured a tire of a squad car with a knife. Van Dyke testified that the teen was advancing on him, Van Dyke testified that the teen was advancing on him and ignoring his shouted orders to drop the knife. Van Dyke conceded that he stepped toward McDonald and not away from the teen, as he had initially claimed, but the officer maintained the rest of his account. The video doesn't show my perspective, he said. The officer had been on the force for 13 years. At that time, he was the subject of at least 20 citizen complaints, 8 of which alleged excessive force, according to a database that includes reports from 2002 to 2008 and 2011 until 2015. Though he was never disciplined, a jury did award $350,000 to a man who filed an excessive force lawsuit against him. Van Dyke testified that McDonald was not the first person he ever shot. To boost their contention that McDonald was dangerous, defense attorneys built a case against the teenager who had been a ward of the state for most of his life and wound up in juvenile detention after arrest for marijuana possession. They also pointed to an autopsy that showed he had hallucinogen PCP in his system. Prosecutors stressed that Van Dyke was the only officer ever to fire a shot at McDonald. They called multiple officers who were there that night as they sought to chip away at the blue wall of silence long associated with the city's police force and other law enforcement agencies across the country. 3 officers, including Van Dyke's partner that night, had been charged with conspiring to cover up and lie about what happened to protect Van Dyke. They have all pleaded not guilty. Even before the trial, the case affected law enforcement in Chicago. The city's police superintendent and the county's top prosecutor both lost their jobs, one fired by the mayor and the other ousted by voters. It also led to a Justice Department investigation that found a pervasive cover-up culture and prompted plans for far-reaching police reforms. A week before jury selection began, Mayor Rahm Emanuel announced he would not seek a third term, although his office insisted the case had nothing to do with his decision. He faced criticism that he fought for the release of the video until after his re-election in April 2015. Ahead of the verdict, the city prepared for the possibility of the kind of massive protest to follow the release of the video in November 2015, with an extra 4,000 officers being put on the streets. Schools and businesses braced for potential unrest, and people across the city paused in the middle of the day to listen for the jury's decision. In the end, the response was muted, with a few hundred protesters marching peacefully through the downtown loop. The issue of race permeated the case, though it was rarely raised at the trial. One of the only instances was during opening statements when Special Prosecutor Joseph McMahon told the jurors that Van Dyke didn't know anything about McDonald's past when encountering him that night. What Van Dyke saw was a black boy walking down the street, having the audacity to ignore the police, McMahon said. Herbert countered, race had absolutely nothing to do with this. And again, this was from AP News. So this guy, Jason Van Dyke, was convicted of second-degree murder for the 2014 shooting of Laquan McDonald in Chicago. And again, details of the story. Laquan looks like he did have a knife, and he was walking in the middle of the street as the video showed. I'll try to leave the video in the description just in case you guys haven't seen it. And, you know, this is good, although this isn't even the worst case. Like, we've seen so many officers get off when, you know, there's no weapon involved. You know, they clearly murdered this person and they get off. So this is incredible that he actually was convicted of second-degree murder. So I'm interested to see what kind of sentence he receives, because it doesn't say what he's getting in here. It says, what they say, 6 years. One legal expert predicted that Van Dyke will be sentenced to no more than 6 years total. But because he's an officer, it will be hard time, possibly spent in isolation. Well, that remains to be seen. So again, I'm happy that the officer is being held responsible, because we do have a huge issue with police violence and police killings in this country. It's too much. It's too excessive. It's way too excessive. Like, even if Laquan did have a knife, like, you have all of these tools to your advantage. You have, a gun at your hip. You have mace. You have a taser. You have a baton. You have handcuffs. You have backup. You got helicopters. You got squad cars. You have armor. You have a shotgun in the squad. You have all these things to protect you. We're supposed to look up to police officers as heroes, but it's increasingly hard to do so when our heroes are murdering us in the streets. Now, again, I understand that Laquan did have a knife, but he did not lunge at the officers, and there was multiple officers on the scene. So, there's just no excuse for being this excessive. And this needs to pick up steam, just like we got a Me Too Time's Up movement for women. We need to have a Me Too Time's Up movement for police officers in this country. And we need to hold them accountable for the things that they do, and for the people and for the lives that they destroy. It's as simple as that. We have to do something about this. I hate doing these videos because I feel as though I can't ever do a video without trying to offer some kind of solution to it. I'm a very solution oriented person. I hate just talking about shit and not being able to do anything about it. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. What can we do to, increase the pressure on these people to be held accountable? What honestly can be done? I mean, I've outlined a few things we can do to, de-escalate force. But what can we do as citizens to make sure that these people are held accountable? Like this video if you like, share it if you feel as though it's shareable, and subscribe to me if you haven't before. Just in case you're a new person and you've never heard me before, subscribe to me. You may be pleasantly surprised. All right, until next time, remember, love, peace, chicken grease, all that jazz. Catch me on social media, and have a great day. I'll catch you guys on the next one. I'm out.